Our final inductee. His name hangs in the hallowed halls of Cooperstown. He grew up in Bethesda, attending Walter Johnson High School, named after the Washington Senators player he considers the greatest pitcher of all time, and perhaps that was a foreshadowing of his great career in writing and talking about the game he loves so much. Let's learn more about Tim Kurkjian's journey.
Tim Kurkjian is one of the most respected baseball writers and analysts around. The Bethesda native attended Walter Johnson, where he played baseball and basketball while also writing for the school newspaper, The Pitch. He would go on to become sports editor of the newspaper. After majoring in journalism at the University of Maryland, Tim began his career with his hometown paper, the Montgomery Journal. He went on to become a beat writer covering the Texas Rangers and Baltimore Orioles in the 1980s before becoming a senior baseball writer for Sports Illustrated. In 1998, he was hired by ESPN, where he has spent the last 24 years as a baseball writer, reporter, and analyst. We've all seen Tim on SportsCenter and Baseball Tonight. His local ties are still strong as he is a great supporter of the Bethesda Big Train baseball team. Tim was recently honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame with the Career Excellence Award. And now we are proud to welcome Tim Kurkjian to the Montgomery County Sports Hall of Fame.
Tim, I see you've got school spirit. You got your Walter Johnson jacket, so thank you for your school spirit.
Yeah, well, as we said, I wrote for the school paper, The Pitch. I did some work for the yearbook. It was called The Wind-Up. I always felt like there was a little destiny involved here, that I went to a school named after the greatest pitcher of all time, and then I ended up making a career in baseball. So Walter Johnson, my days there, the greatest days of my whole life. And in my office, I have a bobblehead of Walter Johnson next to a bobblehead of me, which is pretty cool. Of course, mine is actual size, but that's not the point.
That I can't top that. So now this is not the first Hall of Fame you've been inducted into, and you made the clarification. So you're in Cooperstown. I know you said you're not like Babe Ruth and Willie Mays and those guys, but the fact remains that your name is in the halls of Cooperstown. I want to know, when you got that call in December of 2021, what was that like?
Well, that was the most overpowering experience of my life, and I found out I won the award. I was at the Harris Teeter in Darnestown. I was dragging a rotisserie chicken through the self-serve scanner when Jack O'Connell of the Baseball Writers Association called me to give me the great news. And I started to cry right there at the Harris Teeter. I'm pretty sure that's the first. So the next morning, Johnny Bench, the greatest catcher of all time, called me on the phone and said, "Tim, this is Johnny Bench. Welcome to the club. You're one of us now." And let's be clear, I'm not one of them. I'm not in their club. I'm a writer who's been honored by the Hall of Fame. But still, Johnny Bench called me. And then he talks to me for a little while, and he says very poignantly, he says, "Tim, you know, it's moments like this that take you back to Little League." And I was about ready to cry again, and he said, "And let's face it, you could still fit into a Little League uniform." Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate that.
I'm going to try to figure out how I'm going to make you cry here. Okay, so now the speech. I talked to you, I think, on the eve of your speech at Cooperstown, and I'd heard stories about how many times you practiced that speech. Was it over 5 or 10, would you say, that you practiced your speech?
I did my speech 200 times, to the point where I memorized my speech.
Wow.
16 and a half minutes, and I never looked down at my notes, not once, because I knew how important this was. I practiced it everywhere, out loud, by myself, and through every single time I did it, I cried. That's how important it was to me. So if I may, after the speech, Johnny Bench comes up to me, and he says, come with me. And we're at the Otesaga Hotel in Cooperstown overlooking the most beautiful lake you've ever seen. And he says, come with me. He says, I want you to sit down and I want you to look at that lake for 1 minute. And I don't want you to say a word. I just want you to look at the lake and think about where you are, how you got here, and how many people helped you get here. And I sat next to the greatest catcher of all time, and I teared up again. He does this for every Hall of Fame baseball player who gets in. This time, he did it for a writer. And I can't even begin to tell you how powerful that was for me.
Tim, you're going to make me cry here. Jeez.
Well, the night before, Johnny Bench comes to the big party that we have at the Hall of Fame. My 10 family members are there, including my daughter, Kelly. This is so classic Johnny Bench. So I say, Johnny, my 2 brothers, Andy and Matt, were great college baseball players. Could you please come over and, meet my 2 brothers? He goes, sure, we'll get some pictures taken. So he comes over, and I assume that means that Johnny Bench is going to take pictures with my family. Instead, he takes out his own camera and starts taking pictures of my entire family for 10 minutes, which is so cool. But finally, I say, Johnny, you're the greatest catcher of all time. You need to be in the picture with us. So he hands the camera to this other gentleman, and he takes pictures of Johnny Bench and my family, and that other gentleman was Paul Molitor, Hall of Famer who had more hits than Willie Mays. So I've got 2 Hall of Famers taking pictures of me and my family. Doesn't get much better than that.
By the way, you don't need me up here. We're just going to let you go. But a couple of questions I do have. So we're going to move off Cooperstown for a second, although I'm sure you have 100 stories like that. The Montgomery County Sports Hall of Fame calls, and you're in that. And I know it's not Cooperstown, but I know that for other reasons, it's a big deal to you. And why is it such a big deal to you?
Well, I grew up in Montgomery County. I live in Montgomery County, and I love Montgomery County. I spent most of my childhood at Cabin John Regional Park, playing games, umpiring games, watching the big guys play the game. And then after that, I played 1 million softball games there, so I spent an awful lot of time at Cabin John Regional Park. And when I wasn't there, I was at Airlawn or Fleming Park or Maplewood playing baseball and basketball. This has been an integral part of my entire life. So to be honored by my county, the county that I grew up in, and the thought that Sonny Jackson, who I grew up watching baseball games with Sonny Jackson, and I knew him well when he was a coach, especially in the major leagues, this was such a thrill for me. And Steve Francis, oh my God, I met him for the first time today, and all I can think of is he's the greatest dunker I've ever seen. It was tremendous. So quite an honor for me.
And by the way, Tim is a heck of a basketball player. I know he makes fun of himself. He's a hell of an athlete, basketball, baseball. You played a lot of basketball with Cal Ripken, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was a raging conflict of interest. I should have never done this, but I ended up in the same gym with him, and we would play basketball for 2 hours in this dinky, dingy little gym long before he got his gym. Here's how competitive he was. I learned more about him as a basketball player than I ever did watching him play baseball. So one game, it's 14-14, game straight to 15, and if you lose, you play the next game. We only got 10 guys, so the pressure is off. He literally called a timeout in order to figure out how they could make the final basket and win the game. They missed. We got the rebound, and we won, and Cal Ripken was furious that they lost in the smallest pickup game I've ever seen. That's who he is. And just try to picture this. He weighs 100 pounds more than I do. He's a foot taller than me. And if he was on the other team and his man was late getting down the court on offense, he'd like to harass me all the way down the court from end line to end line in the smallest pickup game ever. And finally, I just looked at him and I said, would you please leave me alone? Would you please stop trying for 1 second? And he said, no. That's who he is. He's going to play the game, he's going to play it properly, and he's going to win.
Wow. And by the way, that's why you're in this Hall of Fame, not because of your writing or your work at ESPN, because of those games with Cal Ripken. That's why you're in. Okay, so let's talk about ESPN. You've become a mainstay on ESPN. You're a baseball analyst, almost 25 years now. When you're at Walter Johnson, are you thinking, yeah, I'm going to be a TV guy on ESPN for 25 years?
There was no chance of that. I was just hoping at Walter Johnson that someday I would own a television, not, let alone be on television. Okay. And the transfer from the writing business, and I'm always a writer first, but the transfer from being a writer to a TV guy was not easy to do, but eventually I figured it out. Right at the beginning, I spent a fortune on clothes. I started wearing more makeup than my wife. I walked around in a circle talking to myself all the time, but it's really been a great second career, even though writing's always my first career, because television is so spontaneous. It's right now. When I worked for newspapers, I would have to wait the next morning to see my story. At Sports Illustrated, I'd have to wait a whole week to see my work. But on television, you can talk about the World Series right now. You're on TV right now, and that immediacy is what I love so much about television. And television is not all that it's cracked up to be. People think, oh, you're famous, whatever, you're on TV. I was at the airport not too long ago. This guy stops me dead in my tracks, and he goes, I've seen you before. Don't tell me where I've seen you. I know you. You work at Applebee's. So I said, no, I don't work at Applebee's, but right.
All right, so I teach a class at the University of Maryland at the journalism school, and we always talk about storytelling. I think if I had to pick one thing that I would describe that you're the best at, and you're very good at obviously a lot of things, but storytelling, as you've shown people here, you're a great storyteller. So does that go back way back to when you were a kid, or how did you become such a great storyteller?
Well, that comes from my father. My father commanded a room like very few people. He was great at that. My mother, who was a brilliant writer, she could really do that too. So you have to recognize what's a good story. And you see, you can't miss it sometimes. Sonny Jackson's teammate, Hank Aaron, sat in with us in the booth a few years ago for 4.5 innings. I sat next to Hank Aaron for an hour and a half, doing a baseball game with him sitting right next to me. He was so funny. He was so charming. His recall was unbelievable. And I stopped keeping score of a game I was covering because I was so enthralled with Hank Aaron. So once the game is over, I check Twitter. Never a good idea to check Twitter after a game. And some guy writes on Twitter, if you ever meet anyone who looks at you like Tim Kurkjian looked at Hank Aaron tonight, you should marry that person. That's how great it was being with Hank Aaron that night.
I don't think we can top that one. Actually, we probably could with Tim, but we got to get people home. So, Tim, I want to congratulate you, and obviously well-deserved, part of the class of the 2022 Montgomery County Sports Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Joe.
Tim, thank you. We're going to give you this.